So maintaining the focus at this symposium, session one's theme is Young Stock Today, Profitable Farming Tomorrow. And who better to invite to present on just that theme is Professor Emeritus from Virginia Tech, Bob James. So Bob is a true legend in calf and heifer rearing in the American dairy industry. Bob brings a lifetime of experience in his research and extension activities, particularly with calves, and he's going to present to us the very latest on calving management, feeding, pre and post-weaning, individual versus group-based systems, accelerated growth on farm pasteurisation, milk for calves, and a lot more. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here today. It was a little warm in here when we first got started, and so I think we cooled it down a little bit, but I will be looking in the back of the audience for those of you who might be nodding off, just a mite. A couple things. I want to thank the invitation. This has always been on my bucket list to come to Australia, so thank you very much. Yanni came to pick me up at 7 o'clock in the morning in Sydney to give up his Sunday morning, and I appreciate that. And it's been a real pleasure. I've had the chance to be at LPC for a day and a half, and been a lot of fun. I went to some of the morning sessions, and it was really good. The issues are really similar, whether we're talking about Australia or Virginia. The things about market, about land, about consumer perceptions, they're really no different than what we face in the US. We have the same things. We have tremendous changes happening now in the dairy industry, and thanks to our wonderful president, it's going to get even worse, okay? And we're not going to talk anymore about politics, okay? Thank you. The other thing that's very gratifying is I notice you Aussies really talk fast, so I don't have to slow down, and it's wonderful to be someplace where people speak some English, because I work through translators a lot, and sometimes that becomes a little difficult. As you see, I get rather engaged, and so let's get started. This was the title given to me, and I think it's really pretty neat. I really am excited about this. We're talking about rearing replacements, heifer data. It's more than heifer rearing. We need some data to have good management decisions, our next speaker. And then lifting the game in animal production, what people expect, our speaker that's going to follow me, and I'm hope to integrate some of the things that I'm going to talk about with theirs as well. If we look at our challenges for the calf industry, really affects the future vitality of our industry. So if we look at biology, feeding calves to enable them to express their genetic potential for growth. You know, when have we haven't done that in the past. Turn on some genes for milk production, improve health, labor, notice I spelled that correctly, okay? But comfort and efficiency of our labor. The other one is animal welfare, and who defines that? That, yes, consumer perception is important, but it's also important for us to do some research that helps us to define that. And do we need to change our rearing systems? So what's exciting? We're going to talk a little bit about colostrum, and most of you immediately want to doze off a little bit because you've heard so much. We're going to talk about some new things, though. Impact of pre-weaning nutrition on growth, health, and later performance, and then some calf management systems. So what's new? Well, the role of microbes in environment and diet, hormones and cytokines in colostrum, and the role of immune cells from the dam. And this is a real hot area of research. So if we look at, I want you to think about this with where the animal calves, because that's where it all begins. That's where it all begins. And I apologize for this poor photographer here, because you are going to get a workup, fella, okay? Anyway, so where does it all begin? It's where that calf is dropped. What's the environment? And that is grass, folks. I know it's been a little dry here, but hopefully it will rain sometime in the future. That may be the gold standard, but it's not exactly very practical on a lot of operations. Or does that animal calve in an environment like that? So who's going to get there first? Is it the bacteria in the environment, or the colostrum, or the antibodies and some of the nutrients in that colostrum? So this research was conducted about the same time that I did mine a long time ago, is all I want to say. But if we look at This is the intestinal epithelium of a calf where the colostrum won the race. Look at that beautiful brush border there. These dark spots are actually colostrum antibodies that have been absorbed. Now, if the bacteria win the race, this is higher magnification. That's E. coli actually being absorbed by that intestinal epithelium. Guess what? There's not very much antibody absorption there. Not very much. And this was actually my PhD work in 1978, which was a long time ago, before many of you were born. Okay? But anyway, and people neglected that tremendously. It fell into the black hole of research publications until some other folks have dug it out. So it's important. But what's in colostrum? We know that it's high in solids, it's high in protein, it's high in IgG, our antibodies. But guess what? Look at this. These are what we call cytokines. This is IGF-1. If we look at insulin, look at those levels compared to what it is in whole milk a couple of milkings later. There's a reason that stuff is there, folks. There's a reason it's there. And we've got to remember that, and we're starting to discover some of the functions of that. So cytokines are small molecular weight proteins. They're involved with cell signaling. They influence growth and immune function. The hormones influence nutrient metabolism, cell growth and function. And we're just discovering the role of these in the development of the intestine of that young calf and how important they might be. But you know what? How often do we feed more than one milking or one feeding of colostrum? Because we've all been focused on those IgGs. And that's probably the most important thing. Probably the most important thing. But is there an impact of colostrum on development of the small intestine function? This is the absorptive surface of that small intestine. Look at these villi. And we're finding out now that if we can feed colostrum, or what you folks call seconds, for a longer period of time, guess what? Those villi grow taller. If we look at some work that's been done in Europe, these were some studies where we fed either just replacer or colostrum for a prolonged period of time for the first 4 days of life. So here's glucose absorption. So here's time 0, and here's 2 hours later at 4 days of life, and look at how much more glucose was absorbed in the calves that received colostrum compared to those that were received only milk replacer. If we look at things over here, we see the height of the villi on colostrum-fed calves versus those only fed milk replacer. So there's a stimulatory impact to that. And I've seen it on some farms. I went to a farm one time and we talked about how much milk they were feeding. It really wasn't enough. But somebody was in the calving pens 24 hours a day. They milked the cow. They fed that cow's milk to her calf within 30 minutes. And they diverted the fresh cow milk and fed it to the baby calves for the first, well, as long as the supply lasted. And oh my gosh, I went out and looked at those calves and I said, wow, they're really growing well. So let's look at immune cells. It's very high in colostrum. 10 to the 6, 1 ml is 10 to the 6 maternal immune cells. T and B lymphocytes, neutrophils, macrophages, they migrate across the calf intestine. They're absorbed if it's from the dam. They're found in calf tissues. They activate markers on on leukocytes. They enhance pathogen clearance, and they enhance the response of animals to vaccination. This was some work done at Virginia Tech, and I was pleased to be on this committee. We fed either fresh dam's colostrum, or we took that colostrum from the dam and we flash froze it. So it killed all the cells, and then we thawed it immediately, and we looked at the response of these calves to vaccinations. So vaccinations at 1 month and 4 months of life, these calves receiving the cell-free colostrum, they had fewer numbers of B lymphocytes a month after vaccination. They had decreased gene expression for one of these cytokines, and they had decreased T cells a month after 4-month vaccinations. Pretty darned exciting. Now you think, well, that's all you guys do in research. So how easy is it to feed the dam's colostrum to her calf? Okay? We don't have the systems to do it on a lot of farms. The other one is we have some risks of disease in that colostrum, don't we? You know, I do some work in Mexico. They still have TB and brucellosis, so everybody pasteurizes colostrum. So we can't feed that fresh colostrum to the calves. But boy, if we can, there's some tremendous opportunities there. Some tremendous opportunities. So, optimizing colostrum management. I got to come over here and take care of, look at this side of the audience now. Good dry cow nutrition. I want an optimum calving environment, wherever that may be. But I go to the farm, and the first thing I want to see is, tell me where your cow's freshen. And I want to see something that is the cleanest place on your farm. I want all of you to think about that calf the same way as you think about your child, because biologically they are no different. And would you let your child, newborn, be exposed to an environment like that? I don't think so. So develop that picture in your mind of a young baby, and the same thing applies to that calf. Sanitation and milking equipment. So we want to milk that fresh cow as soon as possible after calving. Well, I only milk twice a day, and the fresh cows get milked that time. Well, that may fit in your system, but realize you're making a sacrifice there in colostrum quality, And so these are compromises that we always make in dairy herd management. We have to milk into clean milking equipment and storage vessels. Again, think about the milk that you ship. If it had a high bacteria count, you'd get cut off the market. The same thing applies to this colostrum. I see fresh cows milked into dirty pails, and it's going to grow bacteria. Every 20 minutes, the bacteria count's going to double at temperature, and pretty soon you've got bacterial soup. I want to cool that colostrum or feed it as soon as possible to minimize that bacterial growth. And that doesn't mean taking the bottle and put it in an old refrigerator you have at the barn, because it may take 8 hours to cool. It means sticking a bottle of ice that has water in it and frozen, and you stick it down in that colostrum and you cool it within 20 minutes. And we must pasteurize if we have a risk of infectious disease. And so there you can throw out my things about the transfer of immunity with the white blood cells. You know, we just can't do it, and that's a compromise we have to make. And then I would like to feed transition milk to the youngest calves as long as possible. We still probably have some of these hormones that are there that are useful for that calf. But figure out a way to feed that seconds to those youngest calves. And you have to, I've been on farms that do it. You have to figure out how to do it within your system. It's a facility and a people problem. To milk fresh cows as soon as possible, have a commitment to sanitation. Minimize the time between milking, feeding, and pasteurization. Facility planning for calving, milking, feeding newborns. What's the flow of animals, of milk, and of people in those three different systems? And some of them are so disconnected that it's just primed for failure. It's just primed for failure. But that needs to be part of your facility planning, definitely in the future. And I want people committed to that process. This is where it all begins. If you don't get this right, you're always playing catch-up. So what's the long-term objective for my dairy calf enterprise? I want to develop a calf to express their genetic potential for growth and lactation. I want low morbidity and mortality. I want low cost per unit of production. So what's the unit of production for calves? It's their rate of gain. We have any Dutch people in the audience? We got Dutch folks in the U.S. Oh, you got, blonde hair back up there, a little bit of Dutch. What are the Dutch like? They're cheap, right? The Dutch guys want to do it. Well, how cheap can I do it per day? Okay? And that's not the mindset we need to have. We need to have how less cost can I do per unit of gain is the important thing. I won't pick on you anymore, okay? Because you have a big smile and you are awake. Okay. And ultimately, I got to make money. I've got to make money doing this. but I want to have an efficient enterprise. How have we fed our dairy calves? We fed twice a day. He's a big strapping guy, Brad Smith here. You eat twice a day? Pfft, get out of here. Okay? You eat all day long, right? Once a day. What's the interval between feedings? Well, I feed at 8 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. You're that calf, okay, at 3 o'clock in the morning, or we'll go back to Brad here, you're going to get a little randy, right, if you haven't eaten in a while, right? We've limited milk to encourage early starter intake. Starve the little buggers. They'll eat that dry feed sooner. Didn't work with you, did it? Okay? We fed 4 liters a day. Why did we feed 4 liters a day? Well, in the U.S., we have a gallon jug, so divide it into 2 feedings, right? What's the quality of our liquid diet? Waste milk. Is this something you'd feed to your children? Some of it's not too bad. Some of it's pretty nasty. And what about the quality of the milk replacer? Got a milk replacer guy up here. How much does it cost per bag, right? Isn't that the first question you get? Hell, we can take care of that in a hurry. You know, it's got a lot of vegetable protein in there. It may not be worth a darn. And what's my cost per unit of gain? It's pretty high. It's pretty high. So, do we focus on low-cost rearing per day? Do we want to promote early rumen development? And we still have a lot of people in the U.S., boy, I want to get those rumens developed early. Do we have a reduced perceived risk of diarrhea? Or do we meet the biological needs for growth and health? Do we encourage labor effectiveness and efficiency? Do we promote welfare of that calf? Okay, which one do you want to represent as an industry? What is normal calf nutrition? Now, I've showed a beef animal there. That calf's got a high-quality diet available 24/7, okay? Small, frequent meals. This Angus calf will drink 6 liters by the end of week 1, and Angus are smaller than Holsteins. They'll drink more than 10 liters by the end of week 6, and it's got a low bacteria content. That's normal. That's normal, okay? And you think about what we've done. Is this normal? Do we want several smaller meals or 1 or 2 meals daily? And yeah, we have some people in the U.S. that feed once a day to their calves. And so I say to those guys, okay, what meal do you want to eat today? That's all you're going to get. Do we want to meet the needs for growth, or we want to promote early weaning development? And what do we gain by early weaning development? Maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks earlier? What's that amount to in the lifetime of that calf? I want low feed cost per day or low cost per kilogram of gain and optimum lifetime profit. Let me back up and show you that. This was a calf that was fed once a day, okay, about 3 liters of milk. Is that what you want? I got a good dairy character, right? That's not what we want in babies. This is almost the same age Jersey calf right there. A little bit of difference? You bet. Our research at universities and industry has supported the concept of early weaning and limited feeding, and some still do. I used to teach this, you know, back when I first got started. We want to get early rumen development and wean these little buggers sooner. So what are the challenges? We have differences in colostrum status, genetics. Environment is huge. Temperature, solar exposure. Do you think their maintenance requirements were higher this morning? Just a little. Now, you come to the U.S. and, oh my gosh, you know, when it's minus 30 C, you hardly feed them enough to keep them growing. Dust, season of birth. Do we adjust the feeding programs for some of those things? Usually not. Let's look at whole milk, Jersey and Holstein, on a fluid and a dry matter basis. Jersey, that's on a powder basis, that's on a powder basis. There's Holstein milk. You know, there's a reason why those levels of nutrients are in there, and it's not necessarily to make cheese, okay? So why does the cow's milk have so much fat and protein? does Mother Nature account for variation in environment and nutrient needs of the calf with some margins of safety? Are we going to put a little bit more fat in there than they need? There are some of us here in this audience that would be ready for winter a lot more quickly than some other people. You know, look at this poor guy here. You bring him into the U.S. and northern Minnesota, and you're going to get cold as all get out, you know? You look at somebody like me, and I'm ready for it. Bring it on, okay? Is body condition important to the calf too? You bet, because what happens to a calf when it gets sick? It quits eating and its energy requirements go up. If it looked like that first calf, or that skinny calf we saw up there, what happens to that calf? It's dead. It's dead. So why don't we follow the same logic for feeding calves as we do with cows? What are the nutrient requirements for maintenance, body weight, environment? What are the requirements for gain? How much do you want your calves to gain? And we're finally starting to talk about this a little bit. But I want to have measures of how well and I want to look at week 1, we're kind of lucky to get much of anything. But you know what, week 2 or week 4 is when I want to see some gain. I don't want to see 4 weeks where they hardly gain at all, and then if they're still alive, then they start growing. That's not what I want. And how do we define gain? How many of you did not eat lunch today? Okay, every one of you gained some weight. Some of you gained more than others, okay? But was that really gain, or was some of that fill? Here's the amount of milk you need just to meet maintenance requirements at different temperatures. That's how many liters of milk you have to consume just to meet maintenance requirements, and that doesn't include any gain at all. None at all. And that's a lot. That's a lot. And I've only taken it to 0. Just imagine in the U.S. where we get minus 15, and it gets really cranked up, and you know what? The smaller that animal is, the higher the maintenance requirements are per unit of body weight. Okay? Here's the energy allowable gain. Now, these don't work out quite so well, but here's a 40-kilogram calf, week 1, 500 grams of dry matter intake. That's about 4 liters of milk. At 20 degrees, you've got about 420 grams of gain a day you should get. At 0, it's 136. If you feed a 2020 milk replacer, Rod, do you sell any 2020 milk replacers? Well, they still got a lot of them in the U.S. They're losing weight at 0. Okay, if we crank that up to a kilogram, look at, it doesn't even matter at cold temperatures, they're still growing. Now I put question marks here because our data is not very good. There's no way I'm going to feed a kilogram and get 900 kilograms of gain, okay? We don't have good data for that. This is some work that we did. Is body condition important for the pre-weaned calf? This is a 5-week-old Jersey calf fed about 4 liters of milk replacer a day of a 2020 versus a calf fed 680 grams of whole milk or a higher fat, high protein milk replacer. Any difference in those kidney fat? You bet. Now what happens to this calf if it was still alive and had its kidneys? If it got sick, it would die because there's no reserves of fat to mobilize, and they're going to start breaking down protein. And then we're having a severely compromised calf. So condition is important. I like to look at a 4-week-old calf and see them starting to deposit some body fat over their hips. Environment affects calf growth. To explain this a little bit, this is the energy requirements. Let's just look at this line right here at cold temperature and warm temperature. And guess what? When it gets hot, energy requirements go up too, because you get warm here, right? Now, here's the real challenge, and we have very little data on this. When it gets hot, do they want to eat more? Not really. And so we have some real challenges with that calf during hot weather. So you need to think about heat abatement with calves just like you do for your cows. Just like you do for their cows. There better be shade, there better be some fans on there because they're going to have some real challenges. People say, oh, I feed more milk and it gives them more diarrhea. Well, that's a diaper from a kid that was well-fed some milk, okay? Those of you who've had recent children and those of you who are a little bit older, did you ever change a diaper? There you go. There you go. Oh, there were kid ever blow out a diaper? Boy, you better believe it if they were really chowing down. Guess what? The calves, if you feed them more milk, there's going to be more coming out the other end. And people say, oh, that calf's got diarrhea. No, it doesn't. That's probably fairly normal, unless it's like water. Okay, then we've got some issues. So let's change our perceptions. Calves don't have well-formed stools. Okay, some additional challenges. Feeding temperature at mixing and when the last calf is fed. It's a little chilly today. So you mixed up that milk and it was an hour before you fed the calves, and guess what? It cools down. Okay, feeding twice a day, large volumes, and what are the intervals between feedings? You're going to eat twice a day and meet your requirements. You know, as you get older, we don't do as well with large meals, do we? Or at least I don't, okay? We don't. And what about solids level in the liquid diet with milk replacers? Well, oops, let me back up a little bit. So why don't we just increase the solids level? Well, there's some risks there involved. There's some risks. The biggest risk sometimes is the variation that we have because we're not weighing the water, weighing the powder. And what's your quality for water? I've taken to the point where I tell the farms that I work with, you test your water twice a year. Sometimes even if you have city water, because we've had some episodes in the U.S. with some really bad water quality, it can have a huge impact on your calves, and guess what? You blame the milk replacer guy or somebody else. So, this is some work done looking at feeding jerseys, either 409 grams a day of a 20/20 or a high plane of nutrition at 28/28 at 590. These are Jersey calves. Can they take it? So if we look at this, this is fecal score. And yeah, the fecal score was a little bit higher for the high plane of nutrition. But guess what? We measured the dry matter on that feces and there was no difference. It was a perception that we had that it was a little looser. If we look at average daily gain, these guys were losing weight and these were still gaining. Our digestible efficiencies were the same, but look at our nitrogen retention differences during the first period of the study. So yeah, we can feed calves better, and nutritionally they're going to do a whole lot better for us. This was some work looking at calves fed either 4 liters of pasteurized waste milk or 4 liters of a 20/20. And their original findings were, boy, that 20/20 milk replacer is no good. Well, if we look at the energy allowable gain was higher because milk has more protein and more fat. So nutritionally, these things were not similar. Look at the difference in the proportion of calves that were treated and the number of deaths. If we feed calves better, they're going to be healthier. They're going to be healthier. If we looked at the incidence, it was done in Minnesota. Here's all month. This was treatment rate. 52% of the calves fed milk replacer had to be treated for either respiratory or diarrhea diseases, versus 20% for those calves fed pasteurized waste milk. In the summertime, look at the differences there. It's a nutritional thing. When it's cold weather, we need to feed these calves better. Now, it's kind of funny. You people about dying this morning when you thought it was really cold. I thought it was kind of nice. A friend of mine from Germany is here, Volker, and we had nice little light jackets on today, and it's kind of a nice day. And I was enjoying it. It's 90 degrees Fahrenheit at home today and 80% humidity. I talked to my wife this morning, and she was not a happy camper because it was really hot. But anyway, this influences nutrient requirements. So we're going to move into the last thing, and that's some feeding challenges. Individual housing of calves pre-weaning to group housing. When you have calves in a hutch and you put them into that first group, do the wheels fall off the wagon? Yeah, don't they? Now think what we're doing to these calves. You've changed their diet, and all of a sudden you've changed them from individual housing to a group situation. How many introverts do we have in here? There we go. You'll feel a little uncomfortable being around all these people, okay? My wife's an introvert. Well, you take this calf and all of a sudden you put it into a group and it's got to compete for feed. And that's a welfare issue there. So, Feeding systems to achieve more, and I do not like the term accelerated feeding. I want you to banish that from your memories. This is, I like to call it biologically normal feeding. This is the way it's supposed to be. It's not accelerated, it's not intensive, it's normal. I want some feeding systems to provide precision and accuracy. How many of you have ever been precisely wrong? Okay, boy, this is it. And you found out that, gosh, I was not right, because precision is doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's like hitting your head with a hammer, okay? Accuracy is how close we are to our given goal. And so think about this in feeding calves. If I want to feed calves, I'm going to weigh the powder in the water, and I'm going to weigh how much I feed to each calf. That's precision and accuracy. Taking a bucket with a market on the side and a cup and making milk replacer is not. I want to minimize environmental cost to maintenance, okay? So that means having some bedding in there for cold weather during calves. In the summertime, it means having some fans on that calf to relieve some of the heat problems. I want easy to adjust for changing environmental conditions, animal numbers, temperature, moisture, animal density. That's a challenge. I want to optimize animal welfare, okay? These guys feel good. Guess what? They're going to do better. I want to optimize conditions for animal health. I want to take care of my labor too. Oh, I misspelled that one. Okay. But that's important. How many of you have all the labor that you need? Yeah. So we better take good care of those people, okay? So that it's enjoyable work to do and they're effective in what they do. And I want it to be simple. And you say, well, you know, there's another university guy. So is there a better way than feeding calves than individual housing? This is at Virginia Tech. This is feeding that calf in an individual hutch. Okay? What happens? How hot does it get here? 42, 43? Yeah. It's 43 degrees. And you've got to feed calves. What's your main objective? Yeah, how quick can I get done? How quick can I get done? And if it's a lousy environment for labor, guess what? They got one objective. How quickly can I get this done? They're not going to do a very good job. I don't care who it is, you know, unless your wife is telling you, okay. Okay, this is also at Virginia Tech, and this is our auto feeder facility. And where would you rather feed calves? Where would you rather feed calves? So how do automatic calf feeders work? Well, we can develop a feeding plan, the amount per meal, the amount per day, and the percent solids. And guess what? We can do this accurately and precisely, you know, if we keep that machine calibrated and we take good care of that machine. We can record daily consumption, drinking speed, number of visits, what I call rewarded and unrewarded. It can feed milk, milk replacer, or a combination. This one automatically calibrates. And it'll give you a warning if it's out of calibration. Said, hey, you need to fix this. And it can have automatic and semi-automatic cleaning. And I can feed up to 100 calves from that feeder. And so, wow, there's some opportunities. Now, have we made an investment? You bet. In that machine, in servicing that machine and maintaining that machine and providing the environment for that machine. But I've worked with a lot of dairies who've implemented that, and there are potentials. Most veterinarians, we have some veterinarians here, okay? You say nose-to-nose contact in the U.S. and they all start quivering, okay? And I say, in that regard, that if you're feeding calves individually, do you wash your hands between calves? Because again, I watched people train calves to drink, and they're sticking their hands in this bucket, they're walking right down to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and so let's put this in perspective. Yes, there are risks involved. There are risks in everything we do. We have to manage them. We have to manage them. So this is an example of a feeding plan. We start out for the first 3 days, and that calf may come in at 5 days. And we've got 6 days here. We have a concentration of 150 grams added to 1,000 mils of water. That's a 13% solution, okay? The minimum meal size is 1. The maximum is 1.5. So it means that calf has to wait long enough to get one meal. And if it hasn't waited long enough to build up enough credits, then it's not going to get anything. And it's not allowed to drink more than a liter and a half at any one time. For the next 7 days, we go from 6 liters to 8 liters a day, and now our meal size has increased. We go to 36 days, we're at 8 and 8, and our meal sizes are 1.5 to 2.5, and then the last 10 days, we're going to go from 8 to 2, and then we have a similar meal size. It works pretty well. That's one I earlier used. I kind of go with one that looks like this now, and this is for Holsteins. And it says period 1 is 28 days, and it has 8 and 8. That's for an alarm setting. This calf can come in there, and every either 2 to 2.5 every 2 hours they can drink 2 to 2.5 liters per meal if they want to. There's nobody putting a gun to their head and say they have to, but essentially they can drink just like they nurse off a mom. Okay? We do that for 28 days. For the next 4 days, we drop them, and we arbitrarily put 12 down to 9, and we can change that to 8 or 7. But this is a little wake-up call. It said, hey, the free ride's over. We're going to reduce the milk and kind of encourage them to eat some calf starter. We continue that for 10 days, and then over 14 days, we wean them. And boy, these calves adjust to a concept like that. We can do a little bit of fine-tuning, but it kind of mimics what the cow is doing, This is an example of some research that was conducted in Germany. 940 cows. They didn't put the calves on the feeders until 13 days. They had 4 calves per pen when they were bucket feeding. Then they put them on the auto feeder, and they had 16 calves per pen. So they compared the 40-fit or the ad lib to calves that were restricted, and they only got 6 liters a day. 3 feedings of 2 liters. So boy, these calves peaked out at 14 liters a day. And then here's where we dropped them down. We plateaued them, and here's where we weaned them. So they got a lot more milk. So again, this is where they were fed individually. Look at what happened in days 13 to 27. They gained almost 1 kilo a day. And that's where I want some gain on these calves. That's where I really want to have some gain on these calves. And then our average daily gains were relatively the same. Here's some behavior data. This is unrewarded visits. Those calves that were limit fed were just really kind of ticked off because they kept going back to the feeder and trying to get some more milk, but feeder said, you're only allowed 3 meals at 2 liters. You ever notice how if you're feeding calves individually, and what's the behavior of these calves when you come out to feed them in the morning? And you start, they're really excited. They're really excited. It's like Brad here said, hey, it's lunchtime, buddy. Eyes perk up. Wow, let's go. Okay? Is that normal behavior? Not really. It's kind of interesting. You look at these group-fed calves, and they could care less if you're there. You go walking out through the pens. I remember the first day I walked out into the pen when we had our automatic calf feeder, and all the calves are laying there, and I said, oh, gosh, what have we done? And then I realized they were just sleeping. They were asleep, and they finally woke up and meandered over and started eating. Very different behavior. Very different behavior. So does it depress starter intake? Oh, the dotted line is the limit-fed calves, and here's the auto-feeder calves. Yeah, we delayed it from day 44 until about day 64, 20 days. Whoopee-doo. Don't care about that. Because guess what? These calves were a whole lot bigger, and boy, when they start eating calf starter, they go to town. Okay? Because they're a whole lot bigger and a lot more vigorous. We can record feed intake and look at situations. So here's daily feed intake on these calves, and I say, whoop, we've got to drop there. We've got to drop there. The thing I really get excited about is drinking speed that we can measure on these calves, because drinking speed will drop before intake will. Some of them just get kind of slow in eating. For diarrhea, we get about a 3-day warning that these calves are getting sick because they just start drinking a little bit more slowly every day. They drink all their allocation, but we get a little bit of warning on that on these calves. So that's a neat tool to have. There's a neat smart calf system, and again, some of the possibilities that we have. They've changed this nipple here so it's an activity box. And you know how the cow butts an udder? Well, you measure how aggressively the calf eats. Not only drinking speed, but, you know, are they really going to town at that? And this is kind of some early research. They wear a smart neck band. So you set some alarms, and if you have a calf feeder that may not be the sharpest card in the deck, this light will flash and say, hey, you need to come look at this calf. It's drinking more slowly, or its activity is down. And then we've got a water station that measures their water intake. So there's some neat tools that are there. If I look at early disease consumption, we can look at milk consumption. We can look at activity. We'd put accelerometers on these calves and measure how they move through the pen, how active they are. We can look at drinking speed. We can look at drinking activity. And you know what? I've got this all on my cell phone. So before I left on when did I leave? Friday evening. But we treated some calves on Wednesday. I can look and see how those calves that we treated are behaving. It's kind of cool. Or I can be out through the lot and access that information. It's a wonderful tool. So this shows a veal operation in Switzerland. And I had kind of gone through and identified some calves I thought were a little off. And so they triggered those alarms, and look at that calf. That thing's flashing red light there. It says, oh, you better go over and look at that calf. Here's the water station where I can actually weigh that calf and measure water intake. So there's some pretty neat tools. Now, there's some cost to that. There's some cost to that. So, lastly, to look at some immediate and long-term effects of calf feeding behavior of group housed calves. If calves are housed in groups, they show less indication of stress. They show some improved immune function. They're a little bit more docile. They show some improved feed efficiency. If you feed these calves more frequently, their feed efficiency goes up. Let's use that example of feeding a calf at 8 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. About 3 o'clock in the morning, if we're only feeding 4 or 5 liters of milk, it's all gone. So what are they doing? They're going to start mobilizing body fat. And if it's not there, they're going to start mobilizing some protein. Is that efficient? When we have to do that. Earlier age at first breeding, improved lactation performance on some of these group housed calves. Improved lactation performance. Now that's really hard sometimes to get across because I'm spending more now to see it 2 years from now. And it's like me kicking you in the knee right now and you pull your knee away later on this afternoon or this evening. It's a delayed response. I can tell you in field trials that I've done with dairy producers, they can tell you when those first group fed animals came in the milking system, because they noticed the productivity difference. Now, with all herds, nope. Calves fed more milk consumed more solid feed. So if we're letting them drink milk about any time, they're not used to slug feeding. You know, we've trained them that, hey, food's always there. You know, it's like when I have to stay at home and I'm working upstairs. Boy, that refrigerator's down there. Ooh. It's a real temptation, you know. And I wind up, depending on how much of a mental block I have, making a lot of trips down the refrigerator. Smaller meals, longer pauses between eating. You know, it's not the case of, boy, you go to that chow line and suck it down. And less slug feeding immediately and in later life. You look at feeding behavior of calves and how they behave as cows, and it's different. There's some really neat work being done at University of Guelph by a fellow named this is one of his graduate students, Miller Couchon. So, calf rearing behavior can affect immediate performance and lifetime. Are there benefits from more natural feeding behaviors that appear when they enter the milking herd? Slug feeding type behaviors might be learned. Might be learned. We teach that calf that, boy, feed's coming twice a day. When it comes out, you better go at it, okay? What promotes better eating patterns in dairy cattle? Eating with a friend. So if I don't have an automatic calf feeder, you know what? Putting two calves together does just about the same thing. Does just about the same thing. I work with a dairy in Colorado that raises about 1,200 calves indoors. And they put them in a group at about 3 weeks of age. They pull 2 dividers out, and they got 3 calves. They wait a couple more weeks, and they pull 2 more out. And they said, oh, the benefits of having these calves when they become cows, when they enter the weaning pen are just tremendous. Promote solid intake. They teach each other where the calf starter is. More starter intake prior to weaning, less of a growth check. Boy, this is the big thing that I saw. Putting them in a group pen that's no deal. And these patterns persist post-weaning. It's really pretty doggone exciting. So, to finish up, I think I'm right about on market. You got to do a good job with colostrum, and that's facilities and people. I go into a farm and they got problems. I want to do serum proteins on every calf that's less than about 4 days of age. If we got a problem there, we got to fix it. And that's before we do anything else at all. I want to feed to their biological potential for growth. That means feeding, higher quantity of solids, a higher quality of solids. I want to manage my environment, and that's moisture. You don't have to worry about moisture here because it's so dadgum dry. You know, I was in Arizona a few weeks ago. It was 112 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity was 15%. They said, don't smile. Okay, your face is going to crack. But that still is important for environment. Guess what? We got to do some really different things in that environment. Put the right people in protocols. You have some people that should never be close to a calf. Stick them on the skid steer. Get them away from calves. They'd never know a calf is sick if it died right in front of them. And having people who can detect subtle differences in behavior are priceless. And adopt, I love the thing, one of the messages today was getting ready for change. I'm an old geezer, okay? I'm older than you there, John, probably. Oh, you look pretty young. You know, there's a real advantage to folks like us. We don't have any wrinkles, do we? No, because we keep them filled out. You know, my wife weighs 121 pounds, and she says, I got all these wrinkles. I said, you can take care of that in a hurry. Just start eating more, okay? But seriously, putting the right people in protocols, but adapting to change. I'm really excited about calf feeders. I think it's really cool. I love the idea of group feeding calves because I've seen some of those benefits. And we better adopt to change in feeding our animals. So, with that, thank you. I do want to say that I'm a Jersey guy too. When I first started raising Jerseys, everybody laughed at me. They don't anymore, because it's the only breed in the U.S. where there's massive growth in the population of Jerseys. And that's a 5-week-old Jersey calf right there. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Professor James. Thank you, Bob, for that excellent presentation. Now, we have a good, solid around 9 minutes for questions here. So I'm anticipating some questions from the audience here. If not, I've got about 3 or 4 to line up here. So I'll open it up to the floor first. Are there any questions out there? Nico.
Thank you, Bob.
Sorry, Nico. Before you ask your question, could you say who you are and sort of where you're from, please?
Yes, Nicholas Lyons from New South Wales DPI. Bob, thank you for the presentation. What is your opinion on feeding calves on automatic feeders? Like, they grow better. What is the reaction if they move to robotic milking? So do calves fed on automatic feeders behave better, worse, the same?
I don't think we have the research, but it's based upon just personal opinion. A lot of farms that have robotic milking also have robotic calf feeding. And the advice that I get is do one or the other. Don't do both of them at the same time. I would probably start with the robotic calf feeder first, because you develop a little bit of the mindset of that kind of management. I would suspect that you're going to see some real advantages to that. And I think a much easier transition. The biggest transition when you go to robotic milking is these calves have to learn a very different type of behavior. Now, once they're adjusted to it, I think the challenge to the dairy producer is even greater because these cows don't want to move. You know, they don't want to go into a chute. They don't want to be driven anywhere. And so we have to change our mindset with that. I know that we have a couple of robotic dairies very near to where I live. You know, when they go to do health checks, they just do it in the freestall barn. Cows in the freestall and just go down the line. We don't have headlocks. We don't have anything. There is an intensive area where we can do some things. But by and large, a lot of those things, the cows, you know, you walk in the barn and there's just no noise. And this is what you see with a calf operation. And I think maybe the bigger transition is for people. Other questions?
Any other? Yes, down the front here. Actually, I'll give you my one.
Julie Moore, dairy farmer, Dorrigo. What's the ideal age to transition calves onto the calf feeder?
You know, I'm a university guy. And I know when a student has finally learned and I ask them a question and they say, it depends, okay? I was on a farm in Chile, in southern Chile, and they put baby calves on the auto feeder. Now, they had a woman in that barn who was just amazing. She knew just what to do with those calves to get them trained to the feeder. She had just natural instinct there. That's something I usually don't recommend. I think in my ideal scenario, I want a calf. My guidelines is when that calf is really drinking really pretty well, put them on the automatic feeder. That could be 3 or 4 days. It could be 10 days. But that's the best indicator. Are they an aggressive eater? Move them. Because I think sometimes we wait a little bit too long and they get a little complacent. They're used to eating twice a day. And this training issue is a real big challenge. And some of that involves a little bit of tough love. You have a real good feed, you turn them loose, and you kind of let them experiment for a day, but you don't overtrain them. But it really depends on your dry cow program, your colostrum, and I think the people that you have in that facility. But I don't like to wait too long. I didn't spend all this money to feed a whole lot of calves by a bucket or bottle.
Any other questions? Yes, in the middle here. Can we just wait?
She's the real shy, silent type, I can tell, right?
I was just wondering, you had in your presentation data from calves weaned at 6 weeks and you had data from calves weaned at 12 weeks. Where do you see the optimum weaning age there?
If I have everything going right, I can wean them at 6 weeks. You know, it's a matter of risk tolerance to me. Weaning at 6 weeks is maybe a little bit more risky. You're going to have some calves that maybe haven't quite developed well enough to do that. I think at weaning at 12 weeks, you're spending a lot of money. And plus, you look at your facility costs, and they're really pretty exceptional there. You know, kind of my guide is I'd definitely like to have them wean. I just kind of shoot for 8 weeks is maybe a good compromise. But it really depends upon the individual. I think 8 weeks would be my goal. I know people that have they just do everything perfectly and they do it at 6. And so then I have less facility demands and I have less money spent on milk replacer. Right over here.
Hi, Annie Newton from Tatura in Victoria. The big focus on weaning calves is that they've got to be eating 2 kilos of grain. You haven't mentioned that. Is that still the focus or is something changing?
Yeah, I think so. And maybe, the more the better. I typically see calves eating more calf starter in a group housing scenario than I do individually. And this is something really, really critical to me, and that's having a quality calf starter. I go back to some of my Dutch friends in the U.S., and they want a cheap calf starter. And you shake that thing, and you see it separating, and it's just junk. It's cheap, but gosh, the palatability of it is horrible. And the challenge you run, I think, particularly in some environments, similar like Australia, In the summertime, you are hot and low humidity, and that molasses is going to dry out like that. And people say, well, should it be a textured calf starter or pellets? And I say, do they eat it? You know, do they eat it? I'm not going to get into that argument. If you have a really good textured calf starter, that's great. If you have a pellet and it's a good quality pellet, doesn't fall apart, that can be great too. There's some really neat stuff with adding some, and I was at LPC, they add some oat chaff there, and it really, really works well. There's some great work out of Spain by a friend, and I could talk about this quite long, but I never thought I'd say this, to put some chopped straw in a calf starter. If you'd asked me that more than 5 years ago, I said, don't ever do that. But if you chop it, they don't eat a whole lot, but it's just enough to get them chewing. And I'll show you pictures in a group pen that's bedded with straw, and the calves are out there nibbling on the straw at 3 weeks of age. They don't eat a whole lot, but I have a video of a calf at 4 weeks of age. I have his birth date and the timestamp on the video, and this calf is chewing its cud. You know, I saw the bolus get swallowed down the side of its esophagus and coming back up, and I said, well, you hear me saying on the video, wow, this calf is ruminating at 4 weeks. You know, which I never would have thought. And so that's my views on the starter.
Just one or two last questions.
Yeah, Josh Mackey here. Do you see any relationship with dairy size and the ability to let calves develop individually?
You know, that's been kind of interesting since I retired. I lived in Virginia for many years. I've always done a fair amount of consulting with some milk replacer companies. In Virginia, our average herd size is about 200 cows. We have a couple of herds that are more than 2,000. But when I look at some of these really big herds, they have somebody in the calving pen the whole time. They have a specialist that takes care of their calves. And one of the dairies that I work with in Idaho is they're 3,500 cows. They're going to be turning the switches on a robotically milked dairy probably within several weeks. And he says, my next objective is I want the robotic calf barn next spring. And this is 3,500 cows. And so, you know, I think kind of anything is possible. And but I think that there are advantages regardless. I think on the smaller herds, the really nice thing, in our area, we have 2 dairies that have robotically milked dairies. They're about 250 cows. So they have 4 robots. They have a husband and wife and one hired person and a half-time person doing everything. You know, and the wife gets up in the morning, she gets her phone out, she checks the automatic calf feeder at the barn, says, oh, everything's going well, I'm going to have another cup of coffee, you know? And so I think there are really advantages of all those.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to let one more. Hello. One more. Could this be just quick? Super quick.
Yep.
Quick question, quick answer, please, Bob.
Clint Eartham from Minnesota.
Minnesota?
Yeah.
Are you Dutch?
No,
Norwegian?
Norwegian.
There you go. They're a step above the Dutch. They're not quite as cheap, okay?
What's your opinion on feeding hay to the pre-weaned calves?
Well, chopped, okay? Chopped grass hay and clean, no dust, not alfalfa, because they eat the leaves and they don't eat the stems and they'll get some diarrhea. How's that?
Please thank Bob.
Yep.